Right now, the SWE-bench Verified board is a complete Anthropic monopoly, with Claude Opus 5 sitting at 96%, and Mythos and Fable right behind it. And since that entire podium is closed, the models Claude Code and Codex actually run on are still going to cost you by the token. But the best open weight model is Ornith at 82.4%, meaning the best model you can download free and run with the cable unplugged is under 14 points back. So is 13.5 points the difference between a toy and your job? The model sitting at the top of the free rows today is Ornith 1.0-397B, an open weight drop from Deep Reinforce AI, which is a name that didn't even exist on this board a month ago. But that spot puts it squarely above Claude Opus 4.5 and 4.6, meaning a free download is now beating the closed frontier models you were happily renting just earlier this year. And Ornith isn't up there alone, because the rest of the free section is a crowded pack, clustered within half a point of each other, with DeepSeek V4 Pro, MiniMax M3, and Kimi K2.6 all fighting for the same decimal places. Vendors claiming they've achieved parity on their own tests is a very old genre of swagger, dating back to DeepSeek's 2024 paper literally titled "Breaking the Barrier of Closed Source." But the difference now is that neutral third-party boards actually agree with them, confirming that these open models are legitimately staring down the closed frontier. Alibaba's newest Qwen 3.7 Max row is missing from that open weight pack, because while it's sitting right there on the board, that model is strictly closed. Even one of the loudest champions of open weights keeps its absolute best model locked behind an API. But the reality is, the open community doesn't even need it. So the free section of the leaderboard is a crowded, multi-lab pack that already outranks models people paid for this year, which means the gap has a floor full of competition pushing it up. Before we spend any time arguing over whether a 13.5 point lead actually matters for your workflow today, we should probably pause and ask when exactly an 80% success rate became normal. Because if you rewind to January 2025, Anthropic published their own engineering write-up celebrating a breakthrough, where the new Claude 3.5 Sonnet managed to score 49%. At the time, they were calling that the new state of the art, and they were right to. But today, the free downloads clustering near 80% are clearing that proudest closed lab record by more than 30 points. That's what wildly good actually means when you realize a free download just crushed last year's absolute frontier. The frontier premium you pay for is temporary by construction, because whatever the expensive APIs prove is possible today, the free tier just absorbs within roughly a single model generation. So the gap between the closed leader sitting in the mid-90s and the open pack isn't a wall. It's really just a sliding window that keeps moving up. If you try to figure out which of these numbers is even real, you'll find out pretty quickly that the rulers themselves disagree. On the BenchLM board, Claude Opus 5 is number 1, and Ornith leads the open pack. But if you pull up the Steel leaderboard today, you get a completely different picture. Steel still crowns Claude Mythos 5, points to DeepSeek as the best open model, and still lists older rows like Claude Opus 4.8 because its page was last updated back on May 28th. Meanwhile, the field itself admits that SWE-bench Verified is saturating at the frontier anyway. So they built a harder replacement called SWE-bench Pro, which was motivated by a Git history cheating audit that caught models essentially reading the test answers in advance. The new Pro dataset brings 1,865 real tasks that are deliberately contamination resistant, and when you run the current models through it, everyone's scores fall off a cliff. Over on Pro, the open weight leader is GLM 5.2, sitting way down at 62.1 on the public set. And to make things even messier, this benchmark actually reports 3 different competing definitions of a best score depending on whose evaluation methodology you accept. So the exact 13.5 point gap we started with is partly just a property of which ruler you happen to pick. But the punchline here goes the other way, because despite all the noise, every single benchmark agrees on the shape of the market. The closed models are always ahead by low double digits, and the open pack is always close behind and climbing. No board anywhere shows the gap totally closed, and none of them show it wider than the mid-teens, which means leaderboards can't settle what that distance actually buys you. To figure that out, we have to walk away from the benchmarks and look at what the paid product actually is. Claude Code and Codex aren't just bare model weights, which is a fact Anthropic basically admitted themselves. If you read their write-up from when Claude 3.5 Sonnet was taking records, they state clearly that SWE-bench scores actually measure the model paired with a custom agent scaffold. The benchmark grades the entire loop, meaning the paid products are just those scaffolds polished up to read your repo, write a plan, edit the files, and run the tests over and over again. So if you want to dump your API bill and swap in a free model, you actually have to replace both halves of the stack. Otherwise, you just end up with a really smart brain sitting in your terminal with no hands. On the serving side, you can run Ollama and trade a few % of overhead for an easy built-in REST API. Or, if you want total manual control, you can wire up llama.cpp directly in the terminal to get near zero overhead at the cost of your entire evening. And then to actually get the hands back, you pipe that local model into an editor extension like Continue, which rebuilds the automated read and edit loop right where you actually work. The open world knows exactly where the performance gap really lives, which is why Deep Reinforce's whole pitch for Ornith is a self-scaffolding model. According to their launch notes, they trained it to carry the agent loop internally instead of forcing you to bolt an external one on like some kind of caveman. The vendor moat was never just the weights, it's the loop around them. And the open stack is rebuilding that loop from parts today, while the newest free models are training to just bring it with them. So if the open stack is ready, what does it actually take to run an 80% coding model on your own desk? The reality of free and local looks like opening a terminal, firing off one command, and watching the weights download until working code just starts streaming onto your screen without a meter running. Or if you want near zero overhead, you can load a raw gguf file with llama.cpp and stream completions straight into your console. But look, we have to be honest about the hardware ladder here, because those open weight leaders pushing 82% are rat class giants that you'll never run at home. The desk class story is entirely about the 30 billion parameter tier and below, and from what hands-on testers are reporting, that tier is incredibly capable right now. According to Atomic Chat's latest testing, the best local models are still landing near that 80% mark on SWE-bench Verified. They crown Qwen 3 Coder 30B as their consensus top local pick. It spits out roughly 220 tokens a second on a single 24GB consumer GPU, meaning you can run last year's Frontier on the exact same graphics card a gamer already has installed in their rig. And the ladder goes all the way down, because you can cram a quantized 32 billion parameter model into about 20 gigabytes of memory, or pull DeepSeek's Lite variant to finish your code snippets locally. Now, if that's still too heavy, the 7 billion parameter tier runs on just 8 gigabytes of VRAM or a plain CPU, which sounds tiny until you actually watch it write a working Python function on screen. This desk class reality is becoming the target, which is why, per its model card, even the team behind Ornith shipped a 31 billion parameter dense sibling alongside their giant model. So basically, the massive numbers from the leaderboards just condensed into a box on your floor, meaning you can download a coding assistant that rivals the closed Frontier of about a year ago and run it entirely offline. So what does staying on the paid side actually cost you? Well, the paid Frontier is a meter that scales with exactly how hard you work it, which means subscriptions and per token API bills stack up fast. The local route removes the meter entirely in favor of hardware you probably already own and a power bill, though buying a brand new space heater of a GPU from scratch will take years to pay for itself. But for a real slice of builders, the money was never the problem, the data path was. When you use a cloud assistant, your proprietary code physically leaves the building, which is why regulated industries care and why Alibaba reportedly banned Claude Code internally over backdoor fears. A local model works with the network cable physically unplugged, keeping your secrets exactly where you left them. You can always take the middle path and rent these open models through cheap APIs instead of buying hardware, but that just puts the meter and the data path right back on your desk. Those 13.5 points of frontier capability cost a meter and a data path. And for offline teams, or anyone who's ever been burned by vendor lock-in, total control beats those points no matter what the chart says. The question has finally flipped from whether a free download can replace your paid subscription to how much of your job actually needs that paid tail. For bounded coding work like writing isolated functions, refactoring a few files, and clearing well-scoped tickets, a free desk class model replaces the paid assistant today, and making the switch costs exactly 1 evening of setup. The paid frontier's remaining lead concentrates almost entirely in the deep, long horizon, run the tests and retry agent work, which is exactly where tools like Claude Code live. That deep agentic tail is the one task where every model drops and the closed API still justifies its meter. But that boundary is moving incredibly fast, because the open side is now shipping models trained specifically to carry their own scaffold, so they don't need a babysitter to hold their hand through the loop. The day an open release matches the closed Anthropic models on those Pro class scores is the day the last reason to pay disappears entirely, which means you can stop checking the verified board because the agentic tail is where the remaining gap actually lives. Look, saying free local AI is wildly good never meant it was magically identical to a billion-dollar data center. It just means the free floor has permanently cleared last year's frontier, and the 13.5 points that actually remain live in a rapidly shrinking corner of the job. The burden of proof has officially switched sides, because the paid frontier now has to justify its meter against a free stack that actually does most of the job.